Thank you so much for joining today. We're going to run through a few of our next sessions going into the locally optimistic archives. It's helpful to have these conversations be a little more directed, and this makes it relatively easy. We've already thought about these things a lot, and it makes it a little easier for us admins to facilitate good conversations without a ton of prep on top of everything else that we're all doing at this point. So today we're talking through career ladders. I wrote a series of posts earlier this year around how to write a career ladder, how to use a career ladder. And, while I wrote it, I actually thought it was one of the more boring things I'd ever written, but the response to it has been really amazing. I think it's something that this community really needs, that we kind of need to figure out what the career path looks like in data and how we use these tools. It's something that engineering has been good at for a long time, but there's some similarities and some differences. So let's start out by going around and let's just do a little introduction and kind of what about this appeals to you. Are you someone who wishes you had a career ladder? Are you a manager who's building a career ladder? Kind of start to get some ideas of what would be helpful for us to center this conversation around. So I will start. I'm Caitlin Moorman. I'm the head of analytics at a startup called Trove Recommerce. We run resale for brands like REI and Patagonia and enable them to take back product from customers and sell it again. So I lead a team of about 4 people. This is the second time in the last few years that I've led a team around the same size and gone through the exercise of creating career ladders and trying to roll them out. And it's interesting kind of what has changed and where the sort of sticking points were. I learned a lot about organizational specific kind of rollouts and what that looks like, especially in partnering with other folks in the organization to rally around having a career ladder and managing against that career ladder and understanding what promotion processes look like and what the approval process looks like, and kind of, starting to institutionalize those in smaller organizations. So I'm excited to talk to more of you today about what that looks like.
Yeah, so Odorous Lippert. I'm a, data analytics architect, was a director at my last company, but that was just really a manager, like one level, like first line manager. I'm interested in career ladders because, so I've always been sort of the one analytics person or growing a small team. And it's always with like an engineering team where my CTO comes from an engineering, like software engineering background. And I've come from that background myself, but I'm really interested in what's different between the two. And I know they're similar, but it feels so hard to get, I don't know, to have people understand what data analytics is about and how you grow that career. And I mean, just having a career ladder is just a totally awesome idea, I think. So. And I'm looking for work right now too, like a contract or full-time. So, and next person, Brendan.
All right, hello. I think I recognize some of you guys from the call a couple weeks ago. I'm a business analyst at Andela. My bosses are actually very avid readers of Locally Optimistic. And we're actually currently in the process of applying the framework, the career ladder that you guys listed. That's where I'm kind of at now. So I've been doing some research on some of the different paths. And we're at that point where we're kind of just like setting growth OKRs. So I'm just trying to do some research here and get some different perspectives on that. So that way I can kind of bring some more structure to my thinking and kind of the way that I'm evaluating these different things. Right, and I have to pick the next person. I will go with Michelle.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I work in analytics at Billy. We're a direct consumer razor subscription for women. We also now make body care products. We're a really small team. So just the nature of being a startup, I ended up working in a product role for the past year, even though I was hired to do analytics. And so now that I'm finally back to doing analytics, thinking about growing out the team, thinking about what's the responsibility of the second person on the team, and like definitely want to be very thoughtful and develop a framework around career ladders just to make sure that this person knows what's expected of them and, you know, is contributing in a meaningful way, but also feels like they're getting value out of the role too. So yeah, this is a super interesting topic for me. Something that I've definitely struggled with though. Oh, Kelly is next on my screen. Kelly, I don't know if you came in a little bit after, but we're just introducing ourselves.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry I was a few minutes late jumping in. Yeah, so I'm Kelly Burdine. I work at a really small startup called Owlet Education. We build kind of a learning engagement platform for digital learning, mostly targeted at higher education institutions. And I'm the data lead there. I'm a one-person team trying to kind of fill the role of data engineer, analytics engineer, data analyst, kind of the whole gamut at this point before we can kind of grow the team. I've been here for about 4 months. Prior to that, I worked at a sports technology company called Huddle for about 5 years. I started off there as like their lone data person and grew the team to about I'd say probably 15, 16 analysts, plus we had a handful of data engineers as well. And so I was the senior manager on that team, and I created a career ladder and different things while I was there. And I think there's some things I got right and some things that I felt like just weren't quite right. So definitely looking to learn from this group especially, and enjoy and contribute as much as I can to this discussion as well. But yeah, I enjoyed the article, and so I was excited to see this pop up on the virtual events. Let's see, I don't know who hasn't gone yet. I haven't seen Nelson or Kasim go yet.
I'll go. I'll even turn on my video. I said I just finished a workout. Hey guys, hello quarantine buddies. My name's Nelson. I was recently promoted last Friday to manage our 4-person data science team at Coalition, which is a cybersecurity insurance startup. I've been following Locally Optimistic for like 5 years now, and had looked at the careers ladder post a couple times, and now actually next week I'm going to try to use it to set up a career ladder. So excited to do that and meet everyone. Oh, next person.
I guess I'll go, considering I'm the last one left.
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Hi, I'm Qasim. I work at Boll & Branch, run the data team there. It's a 2-people data team. And prior to that, I started there recently. Prior to that, I did a lot of like data consulting. I was also like sole data person at a couple of consumer companies. So super familiar with running that full gambit, and definitely looking into setting up ladders as we scale the team.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. I feel like the questions that I feel like you guys could just moderate this by yourself, but but I'll jump into it. So, you know, one of the things that I find really difficult about managing a data team is the difference between managing stakeholder expectations and managing the realities of the team. Like 5 to 10 years ago, a data team was very different. And it was either data engineers or analysts who didn't touch the back end at all, and who just sort of worked in Excel and kind of had very much the business perspective. But the way that analytics has come together to bridge technical and business skills over the past like 5 to 10 years, as analytics engineering has become part of what most teams do, I find it really difficult to sort of communicate clearly to stakeholders the more technical pieces of the job, and to help the team itself understand how critical it is to understand the business and always be demonstrating business impact, and really kind of be able to speak the language that helps their stakeholders understand the value that they're adding. And I think that comes into career ladders really clearly, because generally, as I've managed people, they really want to know, like, what's the next thing I need to learn, the next kind of technical skill I need to get to move to the next level. But to actually get a promotion for someone, it's more around, how do I communicate the value that you're adding to the business, and how have you built the right relationships with stakeholders to actually get that promotion for you, to have them be your advocate, because it's generally really hard for a single manager to push through a promotion unless there are other advocates who say like, yes, this person like absolutely has gone above and beyond. They're operating at that next level. They're adding a ton of value, kind of all of that. And so it's kind of to Dylan's question, like how do you bridge the gap between what's written on the page and how it gets used in reality? But also how do you write the things on the page as clearly as possible to kind of capture that and make sure everyone understands, like stakeholders, there are all these invisible things that you totally don't care about until we don't do them. But like when the data is wrong or when it's not available, you're gonna care. That's real work. We really have to do it, really have to be good at it, and build processes and sort of build our stack in a way that supports you well so that it can stay invisible. But that same person also has to be like, yeah, here, let's have a deep conversation about how your piece of the business is going and like what the actionable insights we've got in the data are for you. So I would love to hear from other folks kind of how they deal with that sort of disconnect between the technical and less technical parts of the role, and whether that's as a manager or in reality how you've seen it kind of play out in your career. I think that would be super helpful.
I have so many thoughts. Yeah, so managing stakeholder expectations, I find that like the people want the things that they see, right? So there's the stuff that they don't see, that's all the infrastructure, and it's hard to show the value of that. And then there's the stuff they see, like the graphs, the actual insights, the dashboards. So I try to essentially, when I scope out anything that comes in, it always takes into account some portion that I'm going to be engineering or a little bit of a sandbag so that I can keep engineering. So I can say, okay, you're going to spend a couple of days doing this engineering task, and then we're going to do the thing that's going to show the value to the end user, the thing that they see as valuable, right? And trying one tip that I came across was just trying not to, sometimes like one question might have like 4 or 5 different visualizations, or there might be 5 different metrics that they want to see. Show them one at a time. So like if you have a dashboard with 10 plots on it and you hand that to a stakeholder, they might have all been very related and easy to make, but it's going to overwhelm the end stakeholder. And so by showing them little bits at a time, it really shows that value. And then you can also, they give you feedback and you can work on your pipeline as you iterate on that. Then you can throw out the next one and throw out the next one as soon as they feel really good about each one. And so you have this constant dialogue going. You're not overwhelming the end stakeholder, and from your perspective, you're trying to build in the data quality and reliability along the way.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add to that to kind of align with stakeholder expectations is a lot of times in my experience, you'll get a very specific request from a stakeholder, like, I want a dashboard with this, this, and this, right? Or I want this metric, or I want this. And working with that person before any actual work starts, sitting down with that person and really discussing like, what problem are you trying to solve? Like ultimately, what do you want to do? Because a lot of times when it comes down to it, you ask them why they want this metric or why they want this data, and they're not totally sure like how they're going to use it, or they haven't thought through how they're going to use it, and there's probably a major obstacle in the way. And so if you just do kind of what's written on the surface and hand it off and be like, awesome, I did it, it won't actually get used. It won't be useful to them, or they're not sure how to use it, or like Dylan said, it can be overwhelming with how much they requested. And they often just don't know what they actually need. And so I think getting that right up front before any work starts is super, super important, because that means that'll allow you to actually build something they need, not just something they think they need. And the chances of it actually providing value to them or the company are much higher as well. And so that's something really important that I always try to emphasize to people that reported to me, and something that some people were better at than others, I found, and I don't know if this is true just where I was or everywhere, but there's some people that just love the really technical stuff, and that's what they wanted to work on all the time. And so when they got a project, they wanted to just jump right in. And again, if you don't get it right, if you don't set those expectations right at the beginning, it won't be worth anything. And so that was something hard for them to understand, because they want that promotion. They want to jump up in the career ladder. And it's like, but look at all these technical skills I'm always getting better at. And it's like, but it's not making the impact. You're not taking it all the way to driving that value. And so, and here, you know, and it's starting at the very beginning before your technical work even starts. And so that's some of my experiences that I've seen with that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen similar things. And it's the question I usually like to push people to ask starting out is, what decision is a stakeholder trying to make? Or do you really understand kind of the business thought process, right? And the amount of times we've been able to skew some very technical, precise work into like a select count star, right? So something simple like that, it ends up saving kind of so much time in the long run, setting those expectations up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Doris, this kind of also dovetails with your comment about how in some ways it's very similar to engineering, but in important ways it's really not to write a career ladder for analytics. Like I started out with a lot of engineering career ladders as sort of the model for this, because engineers are so good at writing a good framework. Like, they're great. Engineering teams tend to be many multiples the size of the data team at any given company, so there's generally need for a ladder much earlier. But the ability to kind of translate from engineering to analytics is really limited, because like we've gotten so good at software engineering and in separating the impact portion and calling that product. And engineering is really about building and making sure you have the processes and sort of skills available just to build what we've already decided needed to be built. So I would love, Doris, to hear your point of view coming from engineering orgs in particular on how that's played out and how communicating the difference between the two has worked, or what's been successful there.
Yeah. I think sometimes I have a hard time communicating like what's different about analytics versus engineering, but I think part of it is that tie into the business. As analysts, we have to understand the business, I think, so much more than the engineers, or it's not laid out for us. We don't have a product manager, or like I had a product manager, but he wasn't really a data product manager and wasn't as focused on doing data work. And I think what Dylan said was really good about like giving small pieces at a time instead of overwhelming your business with all the data that you have. And then the underlying work that it takes to get to that piece of data, by spreading it out, you sort of give yourself some time to build each of those pieces. And my husband works in analytics also, so it's kind of weird because I find like I'm able to give him advice way better than I can like see my own world and problems. But based on that, I'm like, oh, that's perfect. That's what you're doing. Like, I mean, he built a dashboard for the salespeople, and I'm like, write that down. You're directly impacting the business by salespeople looking at your dashboard, and they're improving their sales based on that. Like, it's driving them to improve their sales, but that's how you're contributing to the business, but it's not so visible. But, you need to have ways to make yourself visible in the business and how the work you're doing is impacting the business from a true financial perspective. So I don't think I have all the answers. I'm still working on it, but that's, trying to figure out where analytics fits versus where an engineering organization fits. Yeah.
Yeah, it's visibility is an interesting way to say that, because I feel like for me, one of the hardest things about having a career ladder is the balance between setting expectations with the team and having a structure and knowing when I believe someone should be promoted and the moment that I can actually get them a promotion, which requires buy-in from a very different set of people. And that visibility is such a huge part of it, just finding ways to make their work seen and making sure that they're thinking about how to make their work seen and not being sort of a silent worker. Whereas I think in engineering, there are often far fewer of those sort of hero engineers that everyone in the company knows because they're actually sort of out there. They're just doing their job and doing a good job. And the engineers know who is contributing, you know, and kind of doing all that work that makes the team function better, but it's not as visible across the company the way it has to be in analytics. And it's not always, that's a real skill that a lot of people have to develop. It doesn't always come naturally to the same kind of people who want to work with data, which can be a real challenge. Michelle, I was also really interested in your comment about making sure that the career ladder is structured so that your new team member feels like they're getting value out of it. I would love to hear a little more about sort of how you're thinking about that. And then for anyone else who has actually had a career ladder in their life, which I have not, would love to know kind of how you think about getting value out of your career ladder and kind of what purpose that serves for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at a handful of different companies in my career so far, and every time I reflect on my past experiences, I recognize like different things that motivated me at different points. Like there were different reasons why I stayed or left different companies, different organizations. But one thing that I definitely want to work on, and when I do hire this person, is making sure that they feel motivated and identifying what it is that motivates them. And sometimes it's growth, really seeing how your work is being applied, and also seeing like what is in the future, like what am I working towards, where will I be in this organization in a year, in 2 years, and really be able to visualize that. So that's like part of the reason why I want to have a formalized career ladder for this person. But yeah, I also have never really had one before.
So when I was working with it, and I think kind of speaking to that point of like, how do you communicate this to somebody else? I essentially wrote up the plan of like, okay, here are bullet points of things we want to say, like, we have our career ladder. We get people to agree on like, these show improvement in skill. And here is like, can create better, you know, stories with data or something. And then as we go along, part of my one-on-ones was to say, okay, what are we doing to work towards that goal? And so at the end of that, and to check in. And so essentially at the end of that is every every goal that we have the example of what they actually did to accomplish that goal. And so we have this like, here are actually the deliverables, here are the things we can point to say they definitely did this. And the goals that sort of say, okay, here's how you move up to the level. And there might be, you know, 4 or 5 goals that demonstrate a particular career level. Mm-hmm. And so you'll be just working on one or the other. And as soon as you might spend, you know, a while working on the same goal to get a couple examples to say like, look, I really can demonstrate more than just one-off. I actually have a mastery of this skill, of this goal. And then once you have all the goals for a level, then you have that discussion of like, okay, now we can move up. And having that document can be something really powerful to take to your manager, who's going to give you approval to promotion, or to the finance team is going to give you more money for that person, or whatever, what have you. But having that is like, look, here's the actual demonstration of the skills, and we can pull up the examples if you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just it's interesting because it's an analytics role where we're dealing with data and quantifying things, but a lot of the skills are like hard to quantify and hard to like measure progress. But I definitely like that idea a lot. I'll probably use that. Thanks.
Just to kind of piggyback on Dylan's comment, at a prior role I was into, this one, they were very opaque with the way that moving between roles kind of worked at the company. So what I would say is like, kind of based on that experience, I kind of got the feeling during certain reviews, like the goalposts had been shifted because they didn't set clear expectations. Like, for example, I had gone through a review with a manager where like she was more of an advisor in a prior period. She gave some advice on how to go through kind of like an annual review. And then she became my manager at a later date. And I essentially did all of the things that she told me to do. And she was so kind of taken aback that she froze, and like it led to like a really tense conversation. So what I would say is like having an imperfect rubric and a transparent rubric, kind of like what Dylan was discussing with like clear examples tied to those things, is much better than nothing. I think especially with data people, they kind of recognize the value of a very iterative approach. And I would much rather see an imperfect rubric iterated upon as opposed to like waiting, or like, I don't know. I feel like most people will understand that there might be flaws in a particular process, and having something there to begin with both allows you to like figure out if someone is going beyond the rubric while also improving the rubric itself, if that makes any degree of sense.
Yeah.
So like keep it, I mean, like where we're going with it now, like on our team for implementing a lot of the stuff on Locally Optimistic, we're keeping it really, really simple and very transparent. And like, to me, that's a great starting spot as like an analyst compared to where I was at other places where they didn't really articulate very much, or it changed a lot quarter over quarter.
All right. Can I share something, guys? This is the rubric that I had at my last job. That's like way in depth. So they have essentially, whoa, it's jumping around a lot. Okay, so levels are going down. So we start at level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and they have particular job titles, different categories of impact. And then, but one of the takeaways that I had with this was, as you move up, usually what the main driver was an increase of scope. So you're first, like, starting out, you need a lot of help, you need assistance through it. You can then move up and you're managing your own tasks, right? You can then move up and you might manage a project, and you have a project that you're responsible for. Then you move up and you might have a team that you're responsible for, right? And it might be a small team. Then you move up and you might be a director where you have multiple teams. Then you move up and you might be a VP where you have directors reporting to you. So one way to think about levels is to think about scope and sort of evaluating what are you responsible for? Like if this doesn't happen, you're responsible for it. And so tying that responsibility to the job and saying, okay, we're going to have you demonstrate that you can be responsible for a full project. Okay, here, and this will demonstrate that you can move up from the previous level to the next level. And having that sort of ownership over some particular scope of things, and that scope is one way that you can take soft skills or things that are hard to quantify and make them more easy to quantify. Like I expect you to be able to communicate to get these tasks and be able to write up the scope. So find out what the problem is, write it up, and be totally responsible for just tasks. That's going to get you into this level. Now, if you want to also be in charge of having an infrastructure at the same time and balancing that project out, or getting ownership over a whole product area where we can come to you and rely on you, that increases your scope, increases your level. So then with this, I'm going to share what I did. And I did a little bit more than most, but I essentially said for myself, like I was trying to make it as simple. This one's still a little bit more complicated than some, but the category, what I'm trying to demonstrate, and what demonstrates it. And so this rubric was essentially I did this also for the people that I had working for me, where I'd say, okay, here's the goal, and we're working on this task, or working on this task. And as soon as you can do that, then I'd check it off, and they become the things that can then be used to show the value.
I love that. I especially love having a really simple heuristic. Like a robust career ladder like this is so overwhelming and it gets really detailed. And at a certain point, especially in data, I think there are so many different types of people, and a good team is comprised of a lot of different skill sets, but not necessarily a lot of different job titles. It starts to get hard to know, like, do I have to be good at everything? Do I have to, like, do I need to move up every level kind of in sync? Should I stop working on this thing that I'm good at to work on this thing that I'm not as good at so that I can like drag that one forward with me? But having those higher level heuristics and say, these are the types of things that you should be working toward. And, we expect whatever, 70% achievement. It's just like an OKR or however you want to frame kind of what those details mean. Having that one really clear demarcation of this is what it looks like to be this type of employee versus this type. And, that also translates across titles. So maybe here's what it looks like for a data scientist, here's what it looks like for a data engineer, here's what it looks like for a data analyst, but they're all kind of around scope of a project or whatever your kind of basic heuristic is, I think is super, super helpful.
Yeah. Also, if you can define it around, so sometimes if your team's not big enough, you can't do this, but if you have even just a little bit bigger team, if you can define it around mentorship, like, are you receiving help with this thing, or are you providing it? That could be a nice way to actually give both people a way to move forward. So you give somebody the opportunity to provide mentorship, and that moves them up, and you give somebody the opportunity to get mentorship, which gives them more skills and responsibilities.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Spotify's engineering ladder does a really good job framing kind of both around like a really clear heuristic and around mentorship. It's like sort of where is your level of impact? Like what's your world and who comes to you for advice, or who are you helping?
So the person who was in charge of this organization also was at Spotify before this.
Yeah, their engineering career ladder is like really, it's very complex and multifaceted, but I really love it. And I love the way they write about it.
Yeah, and this has like, this of course is a big organization, obviously, with 9 levels, and data engineering separate from infrastructure, separate from network engineering. Like, it took a lot of time of me wading through it to be like, okay, this is where we all fit. But it was still unfortunate that it is still, like, Brendan, to your point, I think it's great to have this, and it provides a really nice like communication, but there's still the human element that it's not gonna be the silver bullet. It still breaks down at some point.
Oh yeah, definitely agree with that. There's no way you're gonna be able to. I don't know. I feel like for some reason that's why like sports analytics tends to get like very fetishized in the world of performance, because that's like one of the few areas of life where you can just say like, oh, this person's actually good compared to other people because the rules are consistent across every game. But like, oh man, we have a ways to go as far as like evaluating talent even within an org or across orgs. It's messy.
Right.
Yeah, we try to sort of rely on, and this is something I see, I think, missing from here, though it's a lot of small text, so forgive me.
That's fine.
So one thing we try to do is when we quantify the value of an analyst is try to say, man hours saved or revenue generated, and right, depending on your org, that may or may not be possible. But it's like we ran a project that basically said this was another sales dashboard, and at post project, sales managers basically stopped downloading a bunch of Salesforce reports and just looked at the dashboards. When you quantified it, it was like managers spending 10 hours a week, right? Across a large org, it adds up pretty quickly, right? If you've got 10 managers, it's 100 hours, and that's a quantifiable value that you save the company because now they can go sell or coach better, whatever the case is. And on the revenue side, right, that's easier to quantify if you're in somewhere like e-commerce, right? Versus something that's a little bit more B2B. But that's something I would definitely add to this if you can.
Yeah, that wasn't a part of this. The flip side of that though, there's a piece there where so revenue, like costs saved or revenue generated, how do you distribute that among your team for impact? Because like, I definitely agree with data team itself showing its value even down to, like to the dollar amount.
Yeah.
But like sometimes this problem of one person's in the spotlight, but it actually was really totally dependent on the work of other people.
Yeah, so that's, from the finance side, you would say basically there's some infrastructure costs that you're going to layer across everybody, which is going to be, right, depending on your team, the data engineer, or right, you just assume that some percentage of time is towards infrastructure work. Right, and then it's a question of like, okay, what projects that everybody work on, right? Because everybody has their problem space, and then how much did that contribute to the business? The harder part in all that, I find, is when you have a great analyst replace a mediocre analyst, and then all of a sudden they're finding a bunch of things that the last person missed, right? That there's just more opportunity there if you have a great person replacing a great person. So it's, and like I said, it's a lot easier to do in an e-commerce type setting where that's so much more quantifiable for who worked on which problem or who A/B tested what exactly, right? Than something that's a little bit more, oh, we do a whole bunch of data engineering work.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's an easy solve, and it really depends on the business context.
Yeah.
I have a question for the group that's not really related to the ladders per se, but something that I've struggled with other analysts that I've worked with or other people that I've mentored or managed is like, I don't know what the right word for it is, but like strong internal desire to make sure that the numbers are right and like to rigorously QA data. So like, for instance, the dashboard that they built for the sales team that saved them time in exporting, all of that work is for naught if the underlying numbers are incorrect. And I feel like I personally have developed this strong sense and desire to like QA things an insane amount, just because I've run into cases in the past where I've been wrong and I've been sharing incorrect numbers, and like it was just such a horrible experience that like now is so ingrained in me. And I don't know how to like like teach someone or motivate someone to behave the same way without them making that first mistake themselves.
I believe in taking the piece from software engineering where all reports and dashboards get reviewed by a second person as like a peer review, and that it can be painful because like I've definitely been like, oh, this is literally just a select star from a table.
Yeah.
I don't why but just having that back and forth provides some friction, but also improves your quality.
Yeah. Cool.
I found telling stories about update statements gone wrong can help. Because everybody has a horror story, and it gets, some of them are really bad,
Something I would also say too is like, if that's something that's really important for you as a manager, then maybe that's something you need to like add as like a vetting question when you're hiring people. Because I mean, yes, it's learned, but I mean, like someone can still have instincts as far as like their process goes. And especially since you're at a smaller startup, you probably do need a lot of people who you don't have time to handhold for every single thing. So you'd want to try to focus on finding people who already have a solid process mindset for how they construct and manage their own projects, since they're going to have a lot of ownership, and you're not going to be able to QA every little thing because you don't have the time, and you have your own stuff that apparently you're going all in on QA. So I realize that doesn't exactly answer it, but if it's a priority, that I feel like that's a valid point to bring up.
How would you make what would be your hiring test for that?
Oh, is this for me?
Yeah.
To your point, I would say either I would keep it simple, one of two things. I think the stories example is great. That's something that like when I've interviewed in the past, there's always something that I lean on for like the how would you change or improve. kind of question, but you could make it specific to like a mistake with data quality just to really narrow it.
Yeah.
Or I would just say, ask them about their process for delivering a project or a KPI or something, and see if that's even in there. See if they even, if it's ingrained in them, they're going to bring it up as a step.
Well, or specifically ask, what's your QA process, and find out what it is, right? If they have to QA themselves, like, you know, sometimes you don't have somebody else to look at your data, and you have to come up with a way to, how do I check myself, you know?
Mhm.
Well, and I mean, if I was answering that question, I might actually skip right over my QA process because it is so ingrained, right? It's like, I don't know why I talk about that, especially if I'm a little bit nervous in an interview. So if it's something you don't hear, I would push on it a little bit. And I wouldn't, you know, stop just to, do you know, walk me through your process.
I actually did have a question for the group. Does anyone have an example of a decent kind of like growth OKR framework they found has worked well in the past? If not, it's fine. It's just something that I've got to get done this week, and I figured it'd be worth asking here.
Can you give me a little more context, like for
So
the team?
we're going through the career ladder exercise, and we're looking to set like basically like a couple of goals for, like, let's say this review cycle, and just to have things that I could measure against. I mean, I think this whole conversation has kind of helped me frame everything correctly, but if there's a template or something like that that's worked well for people in the past, it would certainly be helpful.
So the framework that I shared is essentially category the goals you're trying, and you list out like, here's all the goals, and here's the things we want to try to get done, and then use that as in the one-on-ones regularly to just be like, okay, how are we tracking towards this or this? And then at the end of the quarter, be doing that reflective piece of like, okay, what did we say we're going to get done? How do we predict better our accomplishments for the future?
Yeah, so we don't do growth specific OKRs necessarily, but we do team OKRs and kind of like, what are we as a team signing up to do and how does it align with the company? And in one-on-ones with my team, I go through and we look at their career ladder and kind of try to make the best fits between those projects and figure out sort of, this person is going to take the lead on this one because you know it kind of satisfies this requirement, or this project that was like kind of below the line, we're going to pull up because it gives you an opportunity to work on something that you just haven't had an opportunity to work on yet. And we want to kind of make space for that. So it's not like it's necessarily, I want you to go find an opportunity to do this. It is literally like, here's our mapping of what has to get done versus who wants to demonstrate kind of what pieces of the puzzle on their skills.
That was very helpful, Caitlin. Thank you.
There's a pot like folding burritos, product prioritization techniques. This I've also found was like super helpful. I'm gonna throw it in the chat. For just like evaluating OKRs. So if you're thinking about deliverables as an OKR, if you can get that project down to like that like, here's a deliverable, here's a deliverable, here's a deliverable, and then prioritize it, and then use that as that opportunity to assign people, like, you're going to be in charge of this now, or you're going to be part of this and I'm going to be leading it, and using that as sort of this scope of work, right? Like for the career ladder, if you are in charge of creating the project, right? Like that's a higher level than being in charge of just the project itself, of getting a project and seeing it to completion. And you know, there's a higher level that's like looking at projects that actually span many quarters versus projects that are just, you know, like the ad hoc stuff, 2-week projects, 1-month projects, 3-month projects, right? Like each one of those requires different skills to, or I mean, there's just skills that go into like, how do you plan out work for more and more people and for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but Qasim and Nelson, you've been kind of quiet, and I want to make sure that if you've got questions or things you want to throw in, make space for that, but no need to.
I've been super happy listening. I got a bunch of notes taken down.
Fantastic.
Likewise, definitely getting a lot of value. I guess one question, somewhat tangential related, but it's like, how do you guys feel about titles? I don't know if that's a whole separate conversation. It's like coming, yeah. We can always curb it there.
Like what kind of titles? Are you talking about roles? So like data engineer versus data scientist versus data analyst? Are you talking about like senior versus principal versus fellow versus like
I'd be interested
director?
in both.
Okay.
I'd definitely be interested in both. Yeah. Well, sorry, what were you saying?
No, that's fine. I see those as very separate. So like the roles that you do within like all of data science, like that's definitely has some fluidity, like and different opinions on it. And then it's been really interesting in the past 5 years to see, coming from the engineering side, these new levels where everybody's a senior. Seniors become the new normal. Like if you're a senior engineer, that's your you just got out of college, right? Like everybody wants to be like, oh, I want to be a principal or a staff engineer, and like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's part of why, like, yeah, I think there's an inherent level of inflation all around.
Yeah,
So,
I think thinking about scope, like that idea, it's not the only way to look at impact, like increasing impact, right? Because like as an individual person, I could come in and make a really big change to a code base that causes millions of dollars to come in. Was it a long-term project? No. Was it a whole team that needed to work on it? No, right? Like that person should be rewarded. So it's not the only way, but looking at scope of impact. So how many people report to you? What are you actually responsible for? Like if it failed, we come to you to be to get upset for, right? Like what happens if this fails? Is it on you? Like that level of responsibility, and seeing like, are you responsible for your own job? Are you responsible for a project? Are you responsible for a team? Are you responsible for multiple teams or like cross projects? Are you responsible across departments, right? Trying to figure out like what are you, or like if you're trying to hire, what has somebody done, or see what is really your level of scope? Where do you sit in that sort of title?
Yeah.
Right.
I think
sorry, I was just going to say, as regarding scope, there's sort of like titles too, like director versus manager versus like startups seem to have more title inflation than bigger places, because like as I've been looking for roles, I'll get like director roles that are managers of managers, and I'm like, no, that's not quite what I was thinking. So it's really hard, there's this scope of managing people, but then there's also scope of influence, I think, where you're working across the organization and have influence on what's happening. And probably I think what Dylan was going is maybe scope of your technical impact, or you're making architectural decisions about the whole product, or, where if you get it wrong, or I don't know, if your infrastructure falls down, there's sort of the technical career ladder and the management career ladder, which, technical is sometimes harder at smaller places. Like the only way to move up is to move into management, it seems.
Even at large places, Doris, that when I told you my career ladder fell down, I was trying real hard on that technical route. No traction.
Yeah. I mean, I worked at IBM and they did have a technical ladder, but it was still pretty hard to do. You become like, I forget what it is, like senior staff member, and then distinguished engineer was like the ultimate in technical, but you had, you still had a lot of influence on or like projects and where projects went, and even if you weren't managing people directly.
Who's read Managing Humans? Has anybody read that book?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I recommend that one, because he goes into this like management track versus technical track.
Mm.
And I really like that separation, but it requires a big organizational change because the management track should really handle all people things. So performance reviews, hiring, communication across teams. The technical track should really be totally responsible for what gets done and how. Like, we're building this. These are our OKRs. This is what we're going to actually deliver. And they get so mixed. Like, if you're in charge of the people, you tell them what to do. No, the management track actually doesn't tell people like what to do. It just helps manage the people interactions. And when things break down and when people are angry and when people like stop working and just like drift off into oblivion, right? Like those are people problems, and it's important to have somebody with those people skills. But we often conflate in the what gets done and how it gets done into that role. And to really make two separate tracks, you have to create an organization that shows advancement in that what gets done and how it gets done track.
Yeah, I also think there's some delineation there as far as like big company, small company. Because like I work for a fairly, I'll call it a mid-sized startup, maybe it's 100 people or so, where it's like I can't do all one or all the other, and like I struggle with that pretty regularly, right? Because I need to sit down and work on an analytics problem and then go manage the team. So I think that's I'll call it the luxury of big organizations, right? To coordinate a lot of that effort.
Yeah. And I think one way that works, like if you can create the framework for it. So essentially in your manager meetings, you only talk about people things. You don't talk about OKRs. And then you have a specific, like, these are our technical meetings where we're going to talk about technical and what we do. And as the organization grows, you could actually start to delineate it where you're like, this person only comes to the technical meetings and this person only goes to the manager meetings, and we aren't crossing topics. The problem I ran into was the manager meetings was the same meetings that everything was getting talked in. And so I couldn't get like a technical meeting going.
Yeah, unfortunately I do have to hop at 4 o'clock, but this has been great.
Yeah, this has been really awesome. Thank you, everyone, for jumping in and having great ideas.
Can we do a wave at the camera? If nobody wants to be on it, they can turn their camera off right now. I'm going to take a little screenshot. Wave, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.